right, thanks so much for sharing your garden with us. And we're now joined by Pam Pennick. We know her as the author of Lawn Gone, and Pam is also the creator of Digging, a fantastic website. You have a new book out, and that is The Water Saving Garden. And boy, I think a lot of people are ready for this.
I hope so, and thanks for having me back.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to visit with you, Pam. You are a busy bee when it comes to gardening.
Yeah, I am.
And this is a very timely book because this is, I think, more than any other single topic right now on the minds of gardeners is water conservation, certainly here in the Central Texas region.
Yeah, we went from several years of drought to the crazy floods last spring, and we have everything in between. So it's like one extreme or the other here. And so many other parts of the country are going through similar weather events with climate change and weird weather things going on. So it does seem like a topic for a lot of people right now.
So the idea really is very simple, though. It's how can gardeners still create places that are magically beautiful, given these kinds of circumstances? Yeah,
it's about honoring water as the precious resource that it is. And those of us who've been through drought know that feeling of waiting and waiting for the rain to come.
Sure.
And then when it comes, just the celebration of it. And so that's kind of what drove me to write this book is honoring the rain that comes, capturing it when it comes, and making your garden still look beautiful when it's dry.
And leaving enough for other things in life.
For your children, your grandchildren.
Exactly, exactly. Not being too hoggy about the water use, because we've been terrible about that for so long.
One of the things that really inspired me, I took a visit to Phoenix last spring, and there was a large water basin in a very xeric dry garden designed by Christine Tenike right here in Austin. And on the rim of the basin, it said, "A frog does not drink up the pond in which he lives." And that really resonated with me, and that's what I want to help people do with their own gardens.
That's very wise, very wise.
Yep.
Well, one thing I love about the book is the way it starts, because a lot of people, when they think of conserving water and gardening, they think of these minimalistic kinds of spaces that are maybe not aesthetically pleasing to everybody. But you start with a whole assortment of beautiful gardens from all around the country.
Because there are, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I've been privileged to see some really beautiful water-saving gardens, and a lot of people who aren't used to thinking about the concept think it's going to be all cactus. And a lot of people like cactus. I happen to like some cactus
love them.
too. Yeah, but that's not what everybody wants. They're not appropriate for all parts of the country. But there are lots of great dryland plants that work just as well for just depending on your region and your rainfall, like deep-rooted grasses. And here we love our agaves and our yuccas right here in Central Texas, and those are beautiful. So, any kind of native plants tend to be suited for the area that they're in, so long as their conditions are met. So there's lots of options.
Well, you have a special focus in the book on native plants, of course, as one of the chapters. And you have a variety of other things in there that I think are really important for people to think about. There's one that I want you to kind of illuminate a little bit for us. This is ripple zone planting.
Yeah, ripple zone planting. The way I like to think about it is, your house is the stone that's plopped into a lake or a pond. And the ripples that would head out from that stone that's dropped in are zones that you can think about planting. So I'm not one to ever say you shouldn't have any water-loving plants in your garden. I have a stock tank pond in my own. So if you want to have those kind of plants, if there's some treasured plants that maybe your mother grew that you want to grow and they're not so water thrifty, or there's just some that you love, think about planting those close to your house in that first ripple zone.
Exactly.
And that way you can see them every day and appreciate them. You can water them more easily because they're by the hose. So that's your first ripple zone. As you think about the next ripple zone out, maybe those are plants that need to be watered, once a week. They can go off. You can put them on a drip or run the sprinklers, once a week. And then farther out, just depending on how your property is, if you have a large property, maybe the outer zone doesn't get watered at all.
Exactly.
It's just left natural. So it's just a way of kind of visualizing watering zones.
I love the concept.
Yeah, it works great. The only thing to keep in mind with the ripple zone is it does depend on your local conditions. So if your first zone close to your house happens to be kind of low and maybe a little
Of
damp,
course.
that's not going to be, a dry zone, or
Right.
the outer zone is damp, it won't be a dry zone. So you do have to adjust for reality. But it's a good way to think about it.
Unfortunately, reality has a way of
Reality does.
injecting itself into most of these situations.
Yeah.
You mentioned of holding on to water, and this is something that we hear more and more often nowadays.
Yeah.
Water storage, obviously, in terms of rain barrels, collection tanks,
Right.
etc. But there are also ways of just slowing the water down, right?
Yeah, and one simple thing that a lot of people think about is you can do terraces on a slope, and that's something that everybody would probably think of as far as slowing down the water. Like I have a pathway that runs down my slopey back garden, and the pathway can even be terraced. So it's a gravel pathway, it absorbs water, and it's terraced in different levels to slow the water down. That's one way you can do it. The other thing you can do, and I saw this recently in a garden in Rollingwood at the Rollingwood City Hall, they did catch basins.
Right.
So the water comes off the roof, it goes into the cistern, and then as it comes through, it goes into a rain garden, and there's berming to keep the water from just rushing straight out into the street and taking
Right.
out the plants and the gravel with it. So it holds the water for a little while. It's not a very deep basin, just a few inches.
Right.
Holds the water a little bit, and then the water moves on to the next part and sinks in as well.
Very smart strategy.
These are ancient strategies.
Yes, right.
It's just nice to think about them in terms of our gardens today, because the old model was to get the water off your property as fast as you could.
Sure. I don't think they even thought about it.
No, and that's smart for your house foundation. You don't want to flood your house foundation, and you still
Right.
have to think about that. But the model of just piping it all out to the curb
Right.
is not relevant for us anymore.
Yeah, well, there are all sorts of smart tips in the book. It's loaded with information. And there's so many different topics that you cover. We're not going to be able to touch on them all, but there are some basic things like removing so much of the turf, for example,
Right.
limiting the turf that you have, changing what kinds of turf you're planting. Those
Other
kinds
ideas
of things.
instead of
Right.
turf. Right.
You
There's
know-
lots of those different kinds of plants. Maybe adding some paving, thinking about just shrinking the lawn down, because lawn tends to be the thirstiest element for most of our gardens.
Sure.
Needing a little more water than some drought tolerant
Right.
plants.
And also, being smart how you think about shade, because you can create your own shady spaces for both for yourself and for the plants, right?
You can, and a lot of us think about creating shade just for ourselves, which we certainly need in our hot climate. But when I traveled to Arizona recently, I saw that they had shade sails over some of the garden areas out there because the sun is so intense and so bright. And any garden that you go to, once you start thinking about it, like if you're out at the Wildflower Center, you see this long arbor with a vine on it, and it shelters a good deal of the garden beds that are next to it.
Sure.
So that works too. You can maybe grow
Arbors,
plants.
pergolas,
yeah,
things like
things
that.
that are a little more, need a little more shade in the afternoon. Maybe you can put up a shade structure that's not only good for you, but helps the plants too.
There's also an emphasis in the book on the timing of when you do what in the garden, which is really
Fall.
important. That's a good answer. Fall.
That's not true, obviously, for all parts of the country, but it
Right.
works really well in our part of the country to think about planting in the fall. We don't have harsh winters, so you get the plants, most of our plants can grow in the fall. They're growing their roots all winter, and then in the spring,
Exactly.
they are primed to grow when the heat turns on.
Right.
With the exceptions of things that are cold tender here,
Right.
some of our more subtropical plants and maybe
Right.
agaves and stuff like that.
Yeah, if you put a shrub in the ground in spring or late spring,
It's going to be so unhappy. Yeah.
So,
and you will be unhappy because
right.
you'll be standing there with a hose
Right.
every day.
or trying to rescue it
Yeah.
occasionally when you've been guilty of neglect. So
For sure.
yeah, right.
So they'll just grow a lot better if you get them in the ground in the fall.
Well, we really appreciate you coming back to the program, Pam. And again, the book is The Water Saving Garden. And like I said at the beginning of the interview, perfectly timed for what Central Texas gardeners need to hear right now.
That's right. We don't know what the coming year will hold, whether it'll be drought or water, but hopefully the book will give some good tips for either one.
Let's hope we get a little bit of the water.
I hope so too.
Right. Okay, well, thank you so much, Pam, for stopping by. And coming up next is our friend Daphne.